Thank you. I think if we tried to write a book together, that would probably be the end of the writing.
Yeah.
I want to say for all of us, we're just thrilled to be here. Unlike Tina Ansa, who, they went after her, we had gone to Southern Independent Booksellers Association with the idea that we wanted to go after them. And because we heard this was such a great conference and the authors were treated so well and the audience was a great audience. And when Carrie and Amanda approached us at Southern Independent Booksellers Association, we were thrilled. So we're delighted to be here. I'm going to go first, and we're all going to read just a little bit from our book so you can hear not only, forgot about that, not only the difference in our writing, because we don't write exactly the same, but also at our writing group, we don't exchange manuscripts. We read out loud to each other. And the exchange of manuscripts is very, very late in our process. And so you'll get a little sample of what it's like to be at our writing group as well. Someone asked earlier about voices, the lady who won the book. My mother is a card-carrying schizophrenic, and she doesn't mind me saying that either. I'll say that. She's good. She developed late-onset schizophrenia when she was 40, and I was 8 years old. And she has had many lives, and fortunately, she doesn't mind me milking those lives for material. So I've got a lot of books ahead of me that involve my mother. But when I started writing Sufficient Grace, I was writing about a woman who was leaving her husband, and I thought she was leaving her husband because he was fooling around with his secretary, Estelle. And my characters, I do pay close attention to what they do, and eventually they tell me a better story than I know when I start. And I do hear voices, and that's a risky thing for me to say. I even said it to a room full of psychologists not too long ago, and that was really risky because I already have this family history. But anyway, so I started writing this story, and I gave my students an exercise to put two characters in a work situation together and have them interact. And I went home that night to do my own homework and put Ed and Estelle, the secretary, in the office thinking that they would clear the table and go at it in a tryst. And I was kind of looking forward to that. I'd never written a sex scene. And they wouldn't do it. Ed would not cooperate. And Estelle and I both tried really hard to get him to do it. And I had to face the fact after several failed tries that he was really a good husband and he really, was faithful. And he just kept his head low, like a lot of people who've been married for a long time and find out they're married to really strange people. And so then I had to go back to Gracie, the character who was leaving, because she was still leaving. She had not changed her mind. And why are you leaving? And I realized that she was hearing voices, and the voices were telling her to leave. And at that point, I realized, okay, I know what this is. And this is not an autobiographical novel in that there's no character in the book that is my mother makes a cameo as Violet in the psych ward. But as far as main characters, and she'll read that and say, oh, that's me, isn't it? But, and she's not like that all the time. It was just she had a psychotic break. Psychologists are compelled to change medications to try to improve somebody who's doing his best that they've ever done. They feel compelled to mess them up. So she goes back in the hospital every now and then. But anyway, so none of the characters in the book are directly out of real life, but I'm sure on a psychological level, every aspect of the book is autobiographical. But the one thing, when I started the book, I wanted to open it in such a way that someone who didn't have any experience with schizophrenia could understand what it was. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and this was on my second draft of the book, and remembered that when I was 8 years old, my mother had drawn this Jesus at the foot of my bed. And told me that if anything happened to her, if anybody came and took her away, because she understood that she was not herself in the way she'd been previously. that Jesus would always look after me. And one reviewer said that they really liked my book despite my heavy-handed Christian point of view. And I'm here to tell you that I was raised by a schizophrenic and a jackleg Catholic, and I don't know what my Christian point of view is, but I'm working on, figuring out what my spiritual point of view is. So I'll clarify that a little bit. So I'm just going to read the beginning that involves that. So what I did, and what I often do, is I gave a little piece of my experience and my observation in real life to my characters and then let them go with it. And the first epigraph is, "And when you turn to the right or when you turn to the left, your ears shall hear a word behind you saying, 'This is the way, walk in it.'" And that's from Isaiah 30:21. Gracie found the church fans in Martelli's Trash and Treasure on Manchester Boulevard. They stuck up out of a brass spittoon like a clutch of flowers. "Take up the fan," a voice whispered. She turned around, but no one was there. "Take up the fan," the voice said again, this time a little louder. At first she was uneasy. She listened for a full minute and heard nothing. She touched an edge of one of the dusty cardboard pictures. "Take the lot of them," the voice said. "We can use them all." She brought the fans home and hid them in the top of the coat closet and waited. She waited for over a month and a half. When the voice spoke again, she was relieved. "Draw the body of Jesus," the voice said. "Draw the body of Jesus," it insisted. "Draw it larger than life." The voice has since become a comfort. Gracie stands on a step stool, a broad plastic rectangle of cream-colored Rubbermaid plastic. Her copper-red hair is twirled and knotted at the nape of her neck, the way she always wears it when she's working. She is still a slight woman at middle age, still has elegant limbs, radiant skin, but now her body carries the artful curves that so often come with menopause. What was once hard muscle is now fleshy solidness. In her left hand, Gracie holds a Wilcox Funeral Home fan with Jesus printed on it. Jesus wears white and red robes, and his hands are extended as if offering sanctuary. In her right hand, Gracie holds a newly sharpened No. 2 yellow pencil with an unused eraser at its top. She stretches her arm as far as she can see toward the crown molding and draws the first light strokes of hair. With those first feathery lines, she begins what will become a larger-than-life-size Jesus on the bedroom wall, the wall at the foot of the bed. Ed can see it every morning when he wakes up and every night before he pulls the chain to turn out the lamp. Jesus will have to watch over Ed because she won't be there to do it. As she stands on the stool softly striking the pencil lead against the freshly dried white latex paint, Gracie asks Jesus to look after her too, to give her the gift of art that she might do him justice. She will take the fans with her, leave the big Jesuses for Ed. "Ed needs volume," said the voice. "You need portability." Jesus sketches the jawline. Jesus doesn't sketch it. She sketches the jawline and then begins the eyes. Their intensity, the way they first pierce her with their compassion, is hard to translate onto a sheetrock wall. But then she feels a tremble go through her body, that jelly-like shock that happens when you touch something electrical and ungrounded. Gracie jerks slightly to the left, catches her balance with her pencil hand extended. The eyes improve with a few short strokes of the pencil and take on a vision of their own. Gracie knows the unfinished Jesus is watching her. Okay. Thank you. We're going to read in order, and then we're just going to open it up, and y'all can ask us questions about our books, about our writing group, about our process, whatever you want.
Right. I guess I'm next. I want to add my thanks to Darnell. It's a real honor to be here, and it's been really interesting today to hear about all of these varied writing careers. Fry's starting when he was very, very young, many young writers with 4 or 5 books already. My writing career started only about 14 years ago, and most of it's been spent with these women. And I started when I had young children. I think that's sort of what drove me to it. And as far as my writing process, it sort of begins with locking the door of my study and trying to ignore some of the knocks as I go through my writing day. When I came to writing, I really was thinking about a place, a little town in the northwest corner of North Carolina where I lived for 3 or 4 years growing up and visited even earlier than that with my grandparents. This is Surry County. You probably know it sort of as Mayberry country. And when I started writing, this is the place I wanted to write about. I wanted to see if I could really describe what it felt to live in this little town during the 70s and the 80s. But of course, you can't write about a place. A place is composed of the sum of its people. And so I started doing some little character sketches, really at Darnell's. Darnell was my teacher at that time, and she had me doing some character sketches. And pretty soon I did a little character sketch of my piano teacher. And I bet a lot of you here in this audience have had a piano teacher. You think you know what that kind of woman is like. My first book really is the deconstruction of that type. I think there was a certain sort of woman who came of age in the war years, and who we think of, if you think of Lee Smith writing about women, the last girls who came of age in the 60s, my character, Wilma Mabry, is one of the last ladies who really came of age during World War II. I think those people are largely misunderstood, and I think we think of them in one dimension. So I spent my first book trying to describe this woman fully. She's a widow, and in this book she has house guests who end up being accused of murder, and she has to solve the murder and deal with the house guests at the same time. And on top of that, she is asked out for the first time in 20 years by the town's most eligible bachelor. So this is my first novel, and when the second one came along, my publisher really wanted me to continue and do a series. And I have difficulty sometimes with series books because I can never read them in the proper order. So I really ended up writing companion novels. These are novels that have a common setting and some of the same characters. And my second novel, The Sweet Life, follows Miss Wilma's love interest in this first novel. His name is Roy Swan. And this man is really fashioned after a friend of my father's who used to bring us Scuppernong wine at Christmas, and he would bring it in a really artful package of an old milk carton. And this was his hobby. He was the richest guy in town, but everybody sort of waited around for this Scuppernong. It was pretty strong wine every year. So out of this one little thing I knew about this man, the whole character of Roy Swan bloomed. And in this second novel, I decided that his hobby had gotten out of hand, and he has turned his family tobacco farm into a vineyard. We have a number of vineyards in North Carolina now. So this novel follows Wilma and Roy. They've found each other very late in life, and of course, as happens many times, just when you think you're settled and you have your life solved, something awful happens, and Roy becomes ill. And the length of this novel is really about healing. You know, how do we heal each other in a relationship and in a community? And, you know, it sounds like a pretty drab subject, but the only way I can think to deal with something difficult is to look it in the face and use a little bit of humor. So the ways in this town that people have of trying to heal this man are a bit misguided at times. And in contrast to Roy, you see a lot of other different characters in this little town. I thought I would read from one. Her name is Celeste. When I started writing about her, she really almost ran away with the novel. I found her so interesting. Celeste is a person who's grown up on the farm next to Roy, and she has had none of his advantages in life, and she's married a very traditional man early in life. And rather than trying to get her husband healed, as Wilma is in this, she has a little bit different take on it. And I thought I'd read this section. She has just been in the choir practice with her husband in the Methodist Church, and she has made the mistake of contradicting him publicly. And this is just after. Celeste could tell just by the way that her husband's shoulder blades jerked up and down underneath the thin Western shirt she'd been trying to get him to throw away for 2 years, that Travis was mad as a hornet and would be letting her have it just as soon as they got into the truck. Oh, he'd heard what she said to Miss Wilma all right. He'd heard it real good. It was the very thing that he could not tolerate, her contradicting him. And now he fairly well stomped through the church parking lot, ignoring everyone around them, the plain folks, as she thought of them, those that just went about their lives. Roy Swan, sitting in his car, waiting for Wilma, leaning over to open the passenger door for her. Mimi Salter, a longtime widow, riding tonight in Joyce Freeman's blue Taurus, a car picked out and paid for by Steve Freeman for Joyce's 55th birthday. Marriages, whole lives, she bet, running along most of the time without incident, without need to tiptoe across eggshells or hot coals or whatever else. Travis unlocked her side of the cab and stood holding the door with the kind of boiled patience that scared the living daylights out of her every time. He wasn't going to hurt her. She knew that much. He had never touched her in anger during all the time of their marriage, nearly 25 years. He had pointed this out many times, pointed it out that it was her family, her mom and daddy who did that kind of thing. He was right. If anything, these days, she was the one felt prone to violence. She climbed up into the cab carefully, trying to keep her head raised, trying to maintain that quiet dignity they were always talking about when they described the widows of fallen heroes. Not that she wanted to kill Travis. No, that would be a sin, and say what you would, she was still scared of eternal damnation. No, she did not even fantasize about putting a knife in his chest or shooting him between the shoulder blades, right where that Western shirt yoke came down to a point. This was not what she thought about when she was hanging out the laundry or cutting up onions. In those idle moments, she thought about pearls, a lovely string of pearls, real ones, like those they had at sale at Belk's over Labor Day. Pearls lying on a simple black wool dress. That was the style now. She'd seen it on L.A. Law. 3/4 sleeve, boat neck. Travis cranked up the truck and pulled out onto Main Street. For the moment, he kept whatever he was fixing to say in his cocked jaw. He didn't look at her, but held the steering wheel tight and drove with robotic precision. As those few street lights passed over them before they ran out of town and rode into the countryside, Celeste thought of herself, alone, bereaved, sitting in the back of a limousine. The street lights falling across her beautiful, troubled face as she mourned the untimely death of her beloved Travis. It had happened when he was working on that roof leak the boys were always complaining about, maybe. He'd been putting down the roof shingles in the heat, when all the pork chops and the butter biscuits and those awful pork rinds he ate the minute he was out of her sight, they would all catch up with him and clog his arteries, and he would be struck with a single pain and fall off the roof. He would be dead before he hit the ground. And she would have been inside at the time and would only hear a muffled thump. For the life of me, I cannot believe you would do me like that, said Travis in a quiet voice. It is not a great thing to ask, I don't think, for a wife to stand by her husband. So, he was not going to explode at her, but they would be going home via the guilty route. She pressed her hand against her throat, fingering the imaginary pearls. The widow diamond, our Celeste, who lost her husband last year. It made her sweat a bit. She could feel it on her neck to think such thoughts. She cracked her window and let the fall breeze come through. Roll that up, said Travis.
Well, I don't want to have to follow that.
Oh.
Y'all are scaring me a little bit. You ladies laughed a little bit too much at that. the thought of killing your husbands.
There's a lot of men in the audience. They might be able to be the ones that are
Yeah,
kind
that's
of
right.
scared.
Y'all need to worry. It makes me think of what Lee Smith said about Southerners. Said, we'll bring you a casserole, but we'll kill you too. I just want to say thanks to the Hoover Library and all the folks involved with that. I've been wanting to get to this conference forever. A good friend of mine, Silas House, has been to it, and another friend, Ron Rash. I'm name dropping. I'm shameless. But, they go around bragging all the time. Oh, yeah, I've been to that one. It's great. You ought to go. So I'm real thrilled to be here, and they do such a wonderful job. I've been to enough of these that I have a basis for comparison, and they do a wonderful job. So I'm real grateful to be here, especially to be with these women, my writers group. And I don't think I'd be here without them. I know I wouldn't be. Because when I wrote my first novel, Moon Women, as my master's thesis at NC State, and then I got done with school and went back to working full time, and didn't know what to do. And also, I was falling in love with this guy I was working with, so I was totally distracted from writing. I didn't care. But Darnell dragged me kicking and screaming to this writers group. If you want to be a writer and you can't get motivated or disciplined, go let Darnell get a hold of you. Because she will do it. And I think what it boils down to is they believed in me before I was able to believe in myself. And that's real important when you're starting out and you don't know what you're doing. Somebody asked earlier, how do you know if you're any good when you keep getting all these rejections? How do you know if you're any good, if you should keep going? Get your writers group and that you trust and love, and that helps. So I don't think that first book I would have never kept on with it if it hadn't been for their support and nagging and butt kicking. And the same with this third book, which is sort of a sequel to the first book, Moon Women. The main character in this book, the Big Beautiful, is Cassandra Moon, who was in Moon Women. And I had not had any idea to write a book about her, but whenever I'd go do readings, people would come up and say, what about Cassandra? What about Cassandra? What about her life? And so I'd tell these girls that, and they say, well, you need to write a book about Cassandra. I was like, I don't want to write a book about Cassandra. But then it came time I had to come up with an idea for my agent to get another book deal. I said, oh, fine, I'll write a book about Cassandra. But I didn't know what I was going to have happen to her. I just knew she was the character that's the most like me, middle-aged, never been married, and has always sort of spent her life. She's different from me in this way, that she has spent her life taking care of the other people in her family, to the exclusion of getting her own life. And and there was nothing interesting happening in my life that I could plagiarize, and none of my friends had anything interesting going on. And I need to do like Carl Hyacin and start reading the newspaper. And
Told you that.
we're already, all of us are calling dibs on the romantic dolphin idea. So, but I got to talking to my writing group about it, and they said I couldn't. I got this middle-aged woman. She's going through a midlife crisis, and I've always loved the beach, the coast of North Carolina. If you ever get a chance to go to Emerald Isle, North Carolina, you should go. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. I've been going there with my girlfriends on vacation for 20 years now. Two of them's up yonder in the audience. I've got friends in Anniston, so I claim a little bit of kinship with Alabama, and one of them is here today. And anyway, so I thought, well, I'll have her move to the beach because I'll never be able to afford to live at the beach, so I'll live vicariously through her. So then I thought, well, what am I going to have happen to her once she gets there? And they were saying, well, just think of some things you would hate to have happen to you and make them happen to her. And so I started making a list of I'd hate to be naked in public, which is sort of what this feels like. Thank God for pharmaceutical intervention. See me later if you want to know what it is. But I'd hate to, that, and I'd hate to get arrested and go to jail. I would hate to, for some reason I have had this deathly fear all my life of being lost at sea, even though I never go out on boats. And I love the ocean. I think what happened, I went to Myrtle Beach one time when I was a kid, and I was in the water by myself, and I was floating on my back, and I don't know if you know this, but fat floats. So I was a real good floater. And so I sort of fell asleep a little bit, and when I woke up, instead of looking toward the beach where my mama was, my head was turned out to sea. I thought I had drifted out to sea. So I think that's where that phobia comes from. So anyway, so I have that happen to her. And somebody said, well, did writing about all these fears help you get over them? Well, no, but it was fun to write about them anyway. So, and I also have a love story, sort of a love triangle in here. And I told my best friend, I said, I'm going to write a book where the fat chick gets the guy and she don't have to lose weight to do it. Somebody said, oh, so it's a fantasy. Yep. But anyway, I'll read you a little bit where she's not one of those scenes. I probably shouldn't have told you that if I wasn't going to read it to you. A little bit of Cassandra. I was trying to think what you need to know. Where she, in Moon Women, I left Cassandra at the end. She's gone to the beach and spent the night there by herself, which is a daring thing for a woman who's, never lived on her own and never gone very far from home. And her mama has just died, the woman, and she'd spent all her life taking care of her own life, taking care of her mama. And so, all her brothers and sisters have their own families, so she's sort of at a loss. And so and in the years since her mama has died, she got engaged to the funeral home director who buried her mama. And that's not a good place to meet men. You don't want to meet your man in jail or at the funeral home or in a rehab. But that's so when the book starts, it's their wedding day. And she's, something has just told her to turn tail and run. And so she jumps into the limo, the funeral home limo that's been waiting to take them to the Grove Park Inn. And she jumps in the car and starts driving. And this starts where she's run out of gas on the side of this little two-lane highway, I think it's Highway 58, that goes from Maysville, North Carolina to Cape Carteret, which is right next to the ocean. She's about 20 miles from the beach when she runs out of gas. And let's see, Ruth Ann is her bossy older sister, and Dennis is the guy she's just left at the altar. I think that's all you need to know. Stranded in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, in the middle of a nervous breakdown. That's what she was. Stranded. The sound of the word making her think of Branded, that old Chuck Connors TV show where he gets stripped of his rank and kicked out of a fort way out west. Well, that word would apply too. Branded, once Ruth Ann told her about what she had done. She'd be branded a deserter and a criminal, just like poor Chuck, doomed to wander the countryside in shame, helping total strangers because nobody who knew her would have anything to do with her anymore. She wouldn't have blamed Dennis if he'd put out an APB on the limo, but Ruth Ann said he'd been very sweet, had acted like that kind of thing happened every day, had got everybody to go into fellowship hall and eat. No sense wasting all that food, he said. Ruth Ann had left him and his mama and some of their people bagging trash and folding chairs. At that point in the story, Cassandra couldn't stand to hear anymore, had told Ruth Ann somebody else was waiting to use the payphone. She had stopped at one of those drive-up phones just outside Greensboro to call, not wanting to get out in her wedding dress. She reached in the ice bucket for the champagne bottle. Nearly empty. How'd that happen? She'd only taken a sip or two, just enough to wet her whistle. Her mouth was still dry as parchment, though, so she cracked open the second bottle and took a swig. She'd never had champagne before, had been surprised to find it when she crawled back here to lay down after the limo died. When she was a little girl, she'd pretend like she was grown up drinking champagne out of elegant glasses. That probably came from watching the Lawrence Welk show. The bubbles and champagne music, that little pop Lawrence made with his finger in his mouth. What had kept her from trying champagne once she got of age? She must have just forgot, got too busy with living to think about drinking. Cassandra took another swig, figuring it was too late to fool with those fancy glasses now, and smiled at the memory of herself singing along with the Lennon sisters, or even better, Norma Zimmer. You're dating yourself if you know who these people are. She clicked the light off and leaned her head back to see the stars through the sunroof. Dennis had been ahead of his time, all right, ordering a limo with a sunroof. A double-duty limo, funerals year-round, proms in spring, and the occasional wedding. Why not? They were all big events, life-changing events, events that cried out for a ride in a long black car. Damn, now that made her think of the long black veil, that old bluegrass song her daddy had loved, which made her think of her daddy and how she probably would have never run off if he'd been there. He wouldn't have let her. He would have said, "You made your bed, gal, now lay in it." That sunroof really ought to be called a moonroof because it was nighttime and because after all that fuss, her last name was still Moon and probably would be to the end of her days. What was wrong with her? Why couldn't she just be like everybody else and get married and settle down and live a normal life? Dennis had been her last chance, and she had ruined it, thrown it away for no good reason. Goodbye, Mrs. Dennis Oliver. Hello, lonely, pathetic spinster. She might as well get a cat and a shawl. I think I put a joke in here I got from my friend Sheila K. Adams, who's a great North Carolina writer. Said her daddy used to tell, "What's the difference between a spinster and an old maid?" Say, an old maid is a woman that ain't never been married. A spinster is a woman that ain't never been married and or nothing. The black night over her head couldn't be any darker than her future looked at that moment. Dark and empty and lonely, except for those cold stars. Marriage to Dennis might not have been perfect, but at least she wouldn't be laying here lost on the edge of a swampy wilderness full of bears and wolves and who knew what all. A husband would make her safe, make her like all the other women. She wouldn't feel like an outsider, like they all knew something or had something she didn't. Marriage was the key. It would give her the secret password into the club of women. A mosquito whined near her ear, and she almost didn't flap it away, thinking maybe it deserved a little drink just for finding its way through all that veil and hair. It hadn't occurred to her when she opened the moonroof she'd be announcing a buffet to every bug in town. They must have smelled her in there all hot and sweaty, and if the bugs could smell her, then so could the bigger critters. Was that hole in the roof big enough for a bear to crawl through? Cassandra stood, grabbed the edges of the moonroof, stepped up on the seat, and raised her upper half through the hole. It was like being born again. The clean smell of pines and dirt made her feel as if she had emerged into a different world. If she hadn't been so miserable, she might have said the night was magical, even though that word was highly overused nowadays, sorry. I should have cut that line. Okay. It was something, though. The sky spread out dark and cloudless with more stars than she'd ever seen in her life. Not glittering, but soft and almost powdery looking there above the bristly tops of those pines. A cool breeze tickled the veil against the back of her neck, carried the smell of something sweet, honeysuckle. Lord, she loved that smell. Wish she could find a perfume smelled that good. When she was little, she drank honeysuckle, pulled the stem till the little bead of honey showed at the bottom of the flower, and she licked it off. Such a tiny drop, so many it would take to fill a body up. I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
My goodness. I can't tell you, as the last one in the group to be published, the last one in this whole event, which I'm so excited to be here for, to go with my feet on Shakespeare's words. It's a very surreal, bizarre feeling. It's like I've stepped into one of my own fantasies. And I just hope I don't wake up. I don't want to pinch myself too hard. One Fell Swoop is my first novel. It's a novel in stories about the ripple effect of tragedy in a small town. You know from the very beginning that this woman has killed her husband and then herself after she finds him in a very compromising position with his secretary. So you know that from the get-go, and you hear the Clayton story told and retold by many of the members of the community throughout the book. Each chapter is basically a short story told by a different member of the community who tells or retells the Clayton story, and in doing so invariably tells his or her own story at the same time. You take a little artistic license and move back and forth in time. So you start out sort of on the periphery of the event, and you move closer and closer as the book progresses until you end up hearing from the people who were most intimately involved. The Clayton's son, the other woman, and then from the Claytons themselves before the book ends. And you hear from all walks of life and all ages. I'm going to read to you from Bucky McCrae's story. He is a young boy. He's a friend of Mike Jr., who is the son of the Claytons. And his story is set in hunting season 1977, which is shortly after the murder-suicide has taken place. This past summer, Mike Clayton and I both turned 13 and lost our daddies. Mike's birthday was in late June and mine in mid-August, August 17th. By the time my mama shot a picture of me sitting at the dinner table blowing out a blaze of candles on my favorite kind of snowy white coconut 4-layer cake, Mike's mama had pulled the trigger of a Colt 45 and blown the life right out of her and Mike's daddy. Mike lost his daddy to a bullet. I lost mine to a hairdresser with big knockers named Bernadette. And her 2 children, Sissy and Junior. Sissy and Junior are what are known as bastards because nobody knows who their real daddy is. But now it doesn't matter. They've got mine. All spring and summer, Mike and I have been looking forward to hunting season. Every time we pass each other in the school cafeteria or on the baseball field, Mike would pretend to shoulder an invisible gun, take an aim at the air above our heads. "This is the year, Bucky," he'd say. Boom, boom, boom. Then we'd grin at each other and high-five so hard it stung the palm of my hand. Back then, both of us were certain our future was out there waiting for us in the woods, in some forgotten corner of Mr. Roosevelt Pageant's land. Though the way things have turned out, I don't imagine Mike's got much interest in squeezing any kind of triggers this fall. He's moved to Charlotte to live with one of his aunts. Last time I saw him was at the funeral. His eyes were open, but when you looked inside, you could tell the real Mike was so fast asleep, there's no telling when he'd ever wake back up. So I guess you could say, when it comes to me and Mike, I am the lucky one. I might not live with my daddy anymore, but he is still around. And he swore to me that nothing was going to change our plans, that we'd go hunting, father and son, just like he promised. I'm alone in the woods, and there's birds everywhere looking for food in the leaves, hopping around, squawking, twittering, and chirping. There's so many, I think, where's my gun? And then I hear this shot boom out in the distance. And all at once, the birds lift off the ground and out of the tree branches, and the air fills with flapping wings and a big cloud of dust. I want to run, but I can't see where to go, so I crouch down, put my arms over my head. I can't hardly breathe. The sky fills up, a dark, feathery thunderhead with shrill cries that peal out across the land and echo deep down inside my chest, the aftershocks rippling out till they numb my fingers and lips. It's just a dream, I know. I woke up this morning in the same old bed in the same old room I've had ever since I can remember. It's like me in this old room are old buddies laying here, waiting for this whole day to get started my whole life. And now it's finally here. Mr. Pageant, the man who owns the land we hunt on, says he can see change coming. A sure sign, he says, is a flock of migrating birds, especially the ones that travel in those huge black V's strung out across the sky. Mr. Pageant's theory is it all has to do with aerodynamics. He says all those shifting V's and flapping wings are nature's way of sucking the heat right out of the atmosphere. Cool air moves into its place, and according to Mr. Pageant, change always rides in a pocket of cool air. He says he's seen it, a purple shadow edging fluffy white clouds. "You mean cumulus?" I once asked. "Do I mean what?" Mr. Pageant stopped short and gave me a sharp look. Well, there are all types. You know, there's the skinny, wispy kind that look like unspun cotton candy, and you've got your dark gray storm kind. They teach you their names in school. The ones that look like big balls of cotton stuck together are called cumulus. Cumulus, Mr. Pageant spat, his voice running out from between his lips in a long brown stream of tobacco juice. Is that right? He hitched his trousers and looked at me kind of tough. Suit yourself. You can believe me or figure I'm full of it. Don't make no difference. Can't change change.
Okay, we're just going to open it up to questions. Anybody got questions? Jimmy Carl?
Since you were writing your books and approximately the same, talking to each other while you were doing it, did you find that your creative process and your books have influenced and formed each other?
That's a big question.
That's a big question. I'll just say that our process.
That's a good one. You get a gold star.
I'll have to say our process is actually pretty different once we get in the room and the door shut and the way we think about books, which is one reason why we read out loud to each other, because we don't want to write by committee. But why don't y'all answer what you think about that?
I think that what influences us is the work itself, so that when I'm slightly competitive, and when I come in and Virginia inevitably has 10 pages done in a week and they're really good, and I see a novel rolling on, that makes me go back to my desk with renewed energy. And I think it's rare that our styles are very different, our experience, the things that we're obsessed with as writers, they're very different things. And so I think the only problem we have is if something really interesting happens to all four of us, there is some claiming on the incident sometimes. And once in a while, if someone says something clever, we'll ask if we could borrow it.
Yeah, or we'll preface and say, no, you can't have this. Right. But I got to tell you this story.
And sometimes we'll use the same thing in a different way too. That's the other thing.
I think we feed off each other in our different styles. We take what you need from that particular person, and you offer it up when they need it. So it can be really helpful to me just to see their response when I read something, and know they'll go, "Oh, I really like that part," or I'm confused about this or that, and then I'll know, okay, I need to work on that. So, I mean, but then there will be some other time where you've been working in your niche, let's say, but somebody will encourage you to work outside of that just for a period of time to get you going again.
The other thing is we all have different strengths. The first place we go. And for me, the first place is to shake it up and write out of order. And Virginia is really into, thinking about the structure of the book and how the book fits together early on. And Pam's big thing is voice, and Lynn, scene development. And so when we get stuck, we'll share something out loud with one of the other people in the group or in the whole group. And they'll say, well, have you tried this? Have you go back and out of order for 2 weeks if you're stumped or something like that. And that helps. No. The question was, do we use each other? Have we ever used each other in our books?
I don't think so. I mean, not consciously. I take little pieces of everybody I know, but it's not recognizable when it's once it gets into a character. The one thing that's really there's an intimacy about a writing group when you read each other's work and you gossip about what's going on in your lives, so that those two things people can see. If I'm having a week that I've had a fight with my mother, and then they see the writing that I've had, it comes through. And once it gets into a book, that moment is past, and my mother can't ever see it, I hope. But these guys can see, and sometimes I'll read something, and they'll know exactly where it's coming from. So there's that element that we get to see each other's interest and the threads in our lives that get woven in.
At some point in time, it was going to happen.
Right.
So was that, if I might ask, was that the first experience of your life as well?
No, the thing about Ed, he really does look for her. I mean, you know, he calls and tries, and he. Right. Well, there was only so much he could do. I'll say that. I want to defend him a little bit. But the thing about Ed is, there's a really good nonfiction book by Virginia Holman called Rescuing Patty Hearst about her mother's late onset schizophrenia. And one of the things that I really recognized in that book that was true of my own parents' experience was her father was in denial and let a lot of things happen that a rational thinking husband would never let happen. And the same thing is true of my father. He was in denial for a really long time, and the only reason that my mother ended up in a hospital was because she got stopped for a speeding ticket after she picked me up from school, and she proceeded to tell a motorcycle policeman that he didn't have the right to give her a ticket, that only God could give her a ticket. And he told her that he could assure her he was empowered by the state of Virginia to give her a ticket. And so she got out of the car and started beating him up right as George Washington High School let out. So there were these rows of high school students cheering my mother on, and the cop was backing up. And so they all went to court. I went to jail with my mother. The dog went to the pound. My father and my mother ended up at court, and the judge told my father he would have to do something or they were going to commit her from the court. And I think when you are with somebody who is developing a mental illness, you look the other way and you look the other way and you look the other way as much as you can, because it's just overwhelming to deal with it. And for Ed, you know, she'd always been a little bit challenging. And he says, you know, the things that used to be interesting were now annoying. And I think for him, there probably was a deep sense of relief that he couldn't even identify. And so I do think that that's true, and I think it's often true when you have to deal, especially as a spouse, with someone with mental illness. But that was very observant of you. But I do, you know, I like to give him a little more credit than that. But you know, he's, you know. Oh, thank you.
You mean because it's written in different voices?
Yes, and because it's like a characters don't occur later on. It's chapter and they're done. And it's just not a traditional
Right.
ADA plot.
Are you talking about the one fell swoop, the one with the?
Yes, and I called it
right.
Oh, okay. Yes, it was very, very difficult to get it published. It took me forever. Yes. I'd say I quit. We talked earlier today about, or several people have talked earlier about rejections. I quit counting. I got so many rejections because people were just thrown by it. Even though once you start looking, there are quite a few linked stories, novel and stories out there. You know, there are a ton of them out there. But I remember at one point I had an agent who was trying to sell it, and it was at the time that Girl in Hyacinth Blue came out, which I really admire and love. And my agent, I was like, well, what about Girl in Hyacinth Blue? And she's like, you know, Vermeer is sexy. Well, murder, suicide's not sexy? I mean, I don't know how to be much more sensational. So it was, people were thrown by it. Wanted me to change it so there was, you know, somebody stayed. You had it from the point of view of a character who carries it through. Yeah, well, thank you. It was, well, I mean, it just didn't work any other way, because that's the concept and the form of it were too interwoven. I didn't know how to rewrite it. And I have to say that writing group really stuck by me. Well, I remember one time I got a whole pack of rejection letters back at once, and we went out to dinner and went through them all and tried to figure out what they meant. You know, there's many ways where they really were incredibly supportive. And Lee Smith, who's been a mentor and teacher for all of us, she was really super about it too. Where she was like, "That's just not going to work." She said at one time, I remember her saying, "It's like they want you to put those books that have a hole in them and the worm goes all the way through. You know, the children's books. You can't do that." So.
Yes.
I've heard some people say, and I don't know if it's way in the past, that anybody that's writing critically says, I've heard that writers are really smart. They're not creative. And then a follow-up to that would be, I know that you have sort of brought some of these women into the fold and sort of encouraged a lot of them. Are you a teacher, and then do you believe that?
Okay, let me divide that up a little bit. I do teach writing, and mostly to adults like yourselves who want to write and who've always wanted to write. And I myself didn't have my books published until after I was a grandmother, so I really identify with that person who's always carried that desire with them, whether they've been writing all along or not. Lynn was a student of mine in a continuing ed class. Virginia was a co-worker who I encouraged to try fiction because she was such a good storyteller, because all four of us come out of a oral storytelling tradition. And Pam, Virginia, and I met at graduate school. She was already a student of Lee's and some other people in NC State, and we just really hit it off. And when we finished our coursework, Lynn had started a writing group from the class that I taught, and I convinced Pam, and then Pam convinced Virginia to come try the group. And the group eventually distilled down into the four of us. So I will have to say, Lynn got published before I did. Pam got published before I did. And they have been as much a support for me as I have been an encouragement for them. It was just a matter of circumstances how we all fell in place. As far as whether a writer can be made or whether they're born, I think the answer is both. I think somebody can learn to be a really good writer and can get published and have a really strong career. I think some writers are born with a special gift, and they will one day be great writers. And I cry all the time. Maybe because I may not be that great
It's not
writer,
a
but-
writing group unless Darnell cries.
But I know there's not I cry at every reading I give. I don't know what it is. I need drugs, but I'm happily married, so I don't want to take them. But I do think what's really important is that some people just won't quit writing, and because of that, they do have something inside them that tells them that this is what they're supposed to do. And sometimes the gift of writing does not culminate in publication. Many people write for different reasons, and there's value in lots of different purposes within that, and within writing. And sometimes just sharing what you've written with one other person can change their life. So that's a valuable thing to do. And sometimes writing, when only you read what you write, is the thing that keeps you sane. And that's really important. So, I'll think about that a lot. And so I think that publication is not the only goal for a writer to have. It's certainly a worthy one, and I'm really glad I finally got published. But had I not published that novel, I would still be writing, because that's what I need to do and want to do, although right now I haven't been doing much of it. But.
I would have quit if I could have. Yeah, there's a lady right beside.
How often does your group meet your writing work?
You too.
Huh?
You talk.
You tell them.
You answer something.
You've been too quiet.
Y'all are doing
Speak
fine.
up.
We try to meet once a week. This last year we have not done that because we've been doing we all have books out and we all work and but we see each other at these kind of things. And so I'm hoping at some point we'll get back to.
We're going to have to readjust, though, because Pam just got a great teaching position.
Yeah,
She's
gotta
going to be
move away.
moving. So we're going to have to figure out a new way to stay in
Right.
touch.
And I've actually been gone for 9 years. I married that good-looking guy up there in the back, and we I left and went to Tennessee. But I would meet when I was in town with them, and we communicate a lot by phone. But
Well, Colorway will be halfway between you and them, so y'all come to my house. There you go.
There you go.
Does anybody have a house we can use?
I have a hard time writing at the beach because I want to be out on the beach. There's a lady right here, I think. My take would be that was it the chicken or the egg, which was first, because it's enough facing that much, facing rejection can send you off kilter if you don't have people to help keep you in balance. You put so much out there, and to have it come right back, it can be daunting.
Right. Well, and whether you're mentally ill or not, I think balancing the creative side with the commercial side of writing is a difficult thing. Because Alice McDermott once told me that publishing is the most dangerous thing that a writer does. And at the time I thought, well, that's easy for you to say. You're well published and have all these awards. But I think that's true. I think it's hard sometimes to be out in the world and doing, reading your book and then going back and being quiet at your desk. I mean, they're two different, very, very different tasks.
the other thing is mental illness exists on such a spectrum, and for the individual it exists on a spectrum. And there are days when the writing probably fuels something dark that shouldn't be fueled, and there are days where it saves you from the darkness. And so in that regard, with bipolar writers, I think sometimes they're up for it and sometimes they're not. And it just all culminates in a whole career. And then you've got somebody like Emily Dickinson, who I think only published 1 or 2 poems, if that. But we still read her work, and it was all published after she was dead. Which, How about something over here? Anybody over here?
Okay.
So I still have a question.
Okay.
Have all of you been writing since very early age?
High school for me.
I wrote some terrible short stories in college, and then wisely abandoned it for 20 years, and then I came back to it.
I think I was late 20s, something like that.
Yeah, I wrote a couple of weird things as a kid, but not a lot. One story that I remember I was really proud of that I read to my mother while she was driving to pick up my brother. It was about this brother and sister who are watching TV, and they get in an argument over what to watch, and the sister picks up a loose brick off the hearth and bashes her brother over the head with it, kills him, and picks up his half-eaten peanut butter and jelly sandwich and begins to eat it, and changes the channel. And I'm like, all excited to read it to my mom, and she looks at me like, I've spawned the devil. So I guess I went underground after that.
Virginia's a middle child, and you remember what Tina said this morning about
I always introduce myself, though, as the well-adjusted middle child.
Right there in the middle.
Oh, we got questions here in the middle.
Y'all managed to balance your writing career, job. How did you do that? How did your family respond to you letting all of your writing into what they
My strategy is to let the housekeeping go. That's the main thing.
I'm single, so I'm fine.
My husband's very patient. It's my Yorkie who decides at 5 o'clock, by gosh, you've got to be finished, because she's ready for dinner and for her walk. So I don't have any children. So it's just she's jumping up and down and barking and nipping at my heels, and my cat gets on the keyboard, and I have to go.
And I was single for 20 years, and my children have always been really, really supportive of me. And then I married this wonderful man and said something to him about it. Could I not get a job right away when I moved to Tennessee? Because I thought I could write a novel in about 6 months and see if it sold. And the other day he said, okay, well, when do I get my 8 years off? Because I didn't really. So, but
Right.
he's extremely supportive, and I'm not a good housekeeper, and he doesn't give me too much whack about it until he can't get through the living room.
And joking aside, we all have to have additional jobs. I mean, I don't know, maybe there are 1,000 writers in the United States who can sustain themselves just on their royalties.
I read that you teach creative nonfiction,
Mhm,
right? Could you tell me a little bit about what your opinion is about staying true to the accuracy of the nonfiction story versus being creative?
I come from a family that wholeheartedly believes that you should never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Yes.
And speaking of that truth, did your grandmother actually kill your grandfather?
No. But the book is inspired by a true event. It's inspired, the circumstances is inspired by something that did happen in the town where I grew up, and just left a real, mark on me. And it's one of those big life questions for me where, you always wondered, how could something like that happen? And so I didn't go back to research the actual event. I didn't even look to see what year it was or anything, but just it was, the story grew out from that.
Yes.
Do you ever find that you have lots of different ideas that don't really fit together? And if you do, how do you kind of keep some of them out of the story that you're working on and elaborate on them in different stories?
Make folders.
She's the most organized.
My response would be, don't let them all in. Don't worry about it when you're drafting. Write about everything that occurs to you. You can't tell how they might be connected down the line, particularly if you're writing a novel. When you're writing a short story, that's a different task. But with a novel, things might get connected later on. And often, when I get about 100 pages into the novel, I'll have all these, and it's not necessarily the first 100 pages. I'll have all these different scenes, and a lot of times I'll have to kick out a couple of characters that aren't playing well with everybody else, and they go into the orphan file, and sometimes you find another place for them. But initially, there may be something much more interesting in this side character that could work.
Clean it up later if it doesn't work, but I trust that storytelling mechanism inside myself. That it knows. I feel like it knows a lot more than I do, and so I try to just stay out of its way and do what it tells me to do. So,
But I don't throw anything away. I don't toss any of it out. Hold on to it. You don't know. It may come back up in that book. It may come up in another book. I hold on to it all.
they do for me that, and I don't stop them. If they go, I let them go because, if I try to stop them, it doesn't work, and B, they know better than I do. I think once I get them going, and it makes me mad sometimes that somebody dies that I don't want to die, or if somebody kills somebody that I thought somebody else was going to be the killer, or.
Right.
But once you get your
really
world
pisses
built,
you off.
and you do hear voices, and it's like Darnell said, you got to be careful who you tell that to. But I listen to the voices and do what they say.
It's like dreaming. mean, when we dream, people say things and they do things. I mean, we don't necessarily have this idea that we're steering them, but then, of course, we are. And so, to me, it works that way. And if I have a character that's really alive to me, often I'll dream about them. Once I dreamt that my character, Miss Wilma, was in a dress shop with me, and she was trying to get me to buy something, was pulling out dresses for me. So, I mean, I think, they are real to me, and that's a sign that I'm doing the right work.
The other thing is, there is no one way to write a book. And some people have more need for a linear idea of what's going on, and they need to hang on to that in order to pull themselves through the book. And some of us don't have a left brain, it's a shriveled walnut of a thing in their head, and that's died a long time ago, and we can't handle too much order too soon. And they're both valid ways you just have to figure out which way works for you.
It really is. Somebody was talking earlier today about it being like a road trip, or it's a journey where you may know where you are when you start out, and you've got a plan. Maybe you have a general sense of what direction you're going in. And lots of times I even know what the last image is, but I don't know what it means until I get there. And invariably you end up taking all these side trips and have all these wonderful experiences that you never would have guessed that you were going to have when you packed up and got in the car. And that's really, it's those moments where those characters do take over, and that you're just sitting there thinking, where is this coming from? That's one of the reasons why I write. That is those sort of transcendent moments that are like magic.
And none of it's wasted, because you may write a scene today that you won't use, but without writing that scene, you couldn't get to the one that you will use, too. That's the other thing. I mean, none of it's wasted at all.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.